Good evening. It's great to have you here. This is the first of our series this year for a new program we're calling Chancellor Presents. In this series, I am so fortunate to be able to discuss, have time with our notable faculty and alumni who have done great things. They've achieved wonderful things, whether it's through their writing, through their life experiences, their stories, and with Dr. Anne Basting, we're kicking the year off right. Here's somebody who has done it all, and all those things that I mentioned and so much more. So you're going to hear an awful lot from and with Anne in our conversation. And before I get to that, I'd like to just share a little bit of background. Dr. Basting has a number of different roles, and I can't believe, Anne, how you do it all. It's pretty remarkable what you've accomplished, but also what you're doing today. And just by way of background, Dr. Basting she was a professor of theater in our Peck School of the Arts. Today she's a professor of English in our College of Letters and Science. And beyond that, there's a number of other roles that she has. She's a teaching fellow in our Lubar Entrepreneurship Center, and much of that is based on some of the work that she's done here that we'll talk about tonight. But like a great research university, what we really want to do is take innovation, take discovery, and really talk about scaling it and disseminating that knowledge. And it just so happens to be that entrepreneurship is a path and platform for a lot of that. So we're going to hear some things there. And also was involved, and she actually was the founding director for our Center on Age and Community, which is so critically important in the world today. And that was featured in a PBS documentary that we'll talk about a little bit further tonight. She also currently serves as the director for 21st. And again, we'll talk about some of that work. And again, amazing, all the things that you've done, all the things that you continue to do. And what our audience may have heard about you on was something that transcends some of the local activities, but your work has been recognized in probably one of the most prestigious ways that one can be recognized by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation when they awarded you. So we're in pretty rarefied atmosphere here tonight, and it is a thrill. So this particular accomplishment is so extraordinary, and it really is recognized that the actual recognition states that this recognition is given to extraordinary originality and dedication in their creative pursuits and a marked capacity for self-direction. Pretty high praise. Tonight, we're going to get a glimpse of what prompted the MacArthur Foundation to recognize Anne, to see those qualities in her. We're also going to find out what's happened since then, because that award was given in 2016. I'd been Chancellor for a couple of years, and it was one of the real highlights at that point in my career, and remains that for us to have, you're our only MacArthur genius, in fact, very few of them in Wisconsin ever. And so it's great to have you here to be able to share your perspectives. As background, Anne has a PhD in theater arts from the University of Minnesota and a master's in theater from UW-Madison. Anne has written several books, and what we're going to focus on is tonight more than the others, a book called Creative Care, which you have received, and this is a book that really focuses on an evolutionary approach to dementia and elder care. And that concept of revolutionary is going to become very important when we talk about truly what's original, what's different in our book tonight. So this is pretty boring, just listening to me and having me go through this. And I can't wait to get into the conversation. Welcome. Thank you for sharing some time with us tonight.
It's truly my pleasure. I'm really happy to share the work.
Great. Wonderful. Well, let me just jump right into it. I'm going to ask you a question. I mentioned theater, mentioned English, really in some ways performing arts and other activities, but also writing and deep thought activities like that really are emblematic of your background. How does that work, and the themes that you've brought forward, how does that inform, and how does that really work through what you've brought to dementia and elder care? Tell us how this works and what's the premise of that.
You know, theater is, at its super most basic point, an agreement between people to make a world together, like a new world that might follow the codes of our world, might totally not, right? And so theater can happen like at the university here in a black box theater, or a main stage, or on a street corner, or it can happen in these two chairs in an agreement between you and me that say these chairs are actually seats on a spaceship, right? And suddenly we've made a whole different world together. That is the joy and transformative power of theater and performance, and also of learning the skills of presence, which I've done a lot of research on, and its importance in health and care relationships. So really, I think the application of the world making and the capacity for meaning making and play and learning and growth are what's desperately needed in aging and long-term care. Somewhere along the line, I don't know who made the decision, but we all bought in and assumed that somehow in aging and disability, those things are not as important as just physical care. And it's just not true. I think we learned it through the pandemic that we don't flourish. We don't survive without meaning and purpose. And play and learning and joy, all those things are part of that sort of a necessary part of a high quality of life and good quality care. So that's sort of been really 20 plus years of my life, is just applying those skill sets of world making and meaning making that I think are innate in every human being into care relationships and care systems.
So I want to follow up and dig into this a little bit. This particular aspect, I want to have you bring to life a little bit the story of Ruth, the Wendy and Peter Pan and elder care living situation. And I want to, for the audience, share, if you can, the power of theater, the power of imagination, the power of play in an elder care setting. What does that mean? How does that rejuvenate? How does that lead to transformation, which we don't often think of in terms of health and recovery from dementia or in elder care settings?
Well, I'll give you two. And one is from this afternoon when I went over to visit my mom in memory care. And, I walk in the room and she's lying on her bed, napping, and you could look at that very, like it's sad. It's in the middle of the day and there's not stimulation and she's just napping. Yeah. And instead, I used the principle of improvisation, of yes and I gently woke her and told her I was there. And I said, do you mind if I just lay down right next to you? Because that looks really relaxing and I'm tired. Yeah. And I laid down next to her on the bed on, beautiful, brightly colored comforter and just held her arm and she started laughing. She's like, what are they going to think if somebody comes in here? We laughed for almost 30 minutes.
I'll be darned.
And she kept saying, what will your dad think if people are just going to think we're crazy? And I'm like, you know what? It's relaxing. Don't you feel relaxed? And then we just start peeling with laughter again. So that's one example.
That's special.
The yes and, right? In the simple moments. The other example is the biggest project I've done to date, which was a collaboration with 12 rural nursing homes. There's a chapter about it in Creative Care across the state of Kentucky, where together we didn't know what was going to happen. All we knew was that we were going to use the story of Peter Pan because of its total iconic themes. And I call it one of those stories that we know by heart, so that even if you have cognitive disabilities, there's something about the story that you know already, so you can feel included. The staff knows the story, the volunteers around the town know the story, the family know the story, the kids know the story, and it's something around which we can all join in and be creative. We took the story apart by theme and then did creative workshops around those themes and rebuilt the story together with a team of artists, training the staff, engaging the residents. The whole culmination was 3 separate live, immersive performances at 3 of the rural nursing homes that were the most joyful theater-making experiences of my life. Of course, then, the potential of that, which I thought was enormous, and we were rapidly doing research on it, just kind of got shut down with COVID, because we finished right in 2019, and as we were doing the final interviews, life stopped pretty much for that, so we had to really adjust. But I think it still tells us what's possible, and the incredible hunger, not just from the residents, but also the staff and the families, to have something they can make and do together. And right now, it's just not conceptualized in that way. It's activities for distraction for the residents, maybe to help improve a specific health condition, which is good, but it's not. It's so underutilized, and there's just so much potential for transformation.
I love that word, transformation. A lot of times when individuals go to nursing homes or assisted living environments, memory care, the decline isn't reversed in any measurable way. It seems like, if anything, it's a further declination. Individuals continue to decline in their cognitive functioning, memory, and so many things. Medicine gets layered on, and all the prescriptions and everything. That's kind of the classic. But you're bringing energy, life, transformation, and that's not normally what we see, experience, or associate with when somebody. And societally, I think there's a comment there too. Oftentimes, individuals lose roles, lose identities, and as you mentioned with your mom, there's not the stimulation. There's, it's pretty easy to sleep in the middle of the day when there's nothing coming toward you, no responsibilities, and no identity. Long ago, I did some of my initial research was on longevity in different societies, and we saw that in Soviet Georgia, some of the longest living people exist in the world. People routinely live into their early 100s. How does that happen? Part of it's diet, agrarian, simpler world, less cancer, less health risk. But the big thing they attributed it to is the role and identity and engagement. In other words, the elders have an important role in tribal feudal societies.
There's a purpose.
So is that purpose. So what have you seen just recently? I'm thinking about some of our earlier conversation with the pandemic. Has this just really been a problem for some of the populations with which you work in terms of nursing homes that couldn't have some of the types of engagements in the work that you've brought to life in so many different ways?
Oh, I mean, the heartache of the pandemic for older people, just numbers-wise, 1.05 million deaths. 75% were 65 and older. Add about 20% for 45 to 65. 4.2% is under 45. It's alarming. And the sort of tacit agreement was that that's okay, right? That in the way that we handled the pandemic, that somehow that's okay. And I think we really learned that our care systems are terrible. I mean, we knew it before. We don't really have long-term care systems in this country. We know a lot of planning came out, like the shock of the pandemic. One of the things that I remain really a strong voice for is that somehow arts and culture, the meaning-making work, the sense of purpose and role and those kinds of things are somehow separated from our health and social care systems. We're bringing meals to people, or we're providing health care, clinical care, but the arts and culture and the meaning and the purpose stuff is over here when they really just need to join channels. And I talk about, in the systems change work, finding ways to pour this like water. Like I do a lot of system studying.
Yes.
And then how can you pour these tools into existing systems and just open up their capacity for meaning making rather than have these two separate worlds that you have to maintain separately. That just doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So one of the most hopeful things that has come out of the pandemic is really an increase in the conversation around social prescribing. Some people may hear about it in terms of like food and housing security, food security, housing security, but also social connectedness and a sense of meaning and purpose. That bringing those things into the health and social care systems through social prescribing and an awareness that those are part of overall health, I think is a tremendous shift that's come around in the last just like 5 years.
So I want to come back to that, because when you talk about social prescribing, you talk about systems change, and we talk about how we scale this work. I want to back up a little bit and talk about how you have scaled the initial findings, your initial work just as an individual, things that are talked about in the book. You started to see the efficacy, the impact of this work with individuals, small scale, and with time slips. That's part of what we needed to learn more about. What is time slips? How has it grown? What is the concept there? What are the fundamental pieces of that and its growth?
Timeslips.org is the nonprofit that was really incubated it started at UWM when I first came to campus in 1995 as a fellow at the Center for 20th Century Studies, where I now find myself full circle directing. And it was really just a container for my experimentation with these methodologies around improvisation and how to make them super clear and repeatable by anyone. And I still remember my friend Beth Meyer Arnold was the director of Luther Manor Adult Day Center, and I had a grant to replicate the approach in 4 adult day centers, and I think it was the first time we were doing it in the day center, and it was like the room just erupted in laughter and joy, and Beth and the staff just said, "You have to start training now." Yes. And I was overwhelmed because I didn't even know if it was replicable, and so we started. We made a tiny little training thing, and really the nonprofit has contained that training mechanism and that support mechanism all the way along. 2011, we went to online training because there was just no way. We were getting requests for trainings all over the world, and we couldn't get out. There's just no way. So that early shift to online really enabled us to, from a research perspective, train consistently. Yep. And that consistent training enabled the researchers to replicate it and then study it. I just ended up putting a Google alert on time slips because people were doing research that I didn't even know about. Yeah. And they would just get published. And I'd be like, oh, that's cool. Yeah. Oh, it has that impact. It has this impact. Yeah. That's really letting it go in that way and letting people take the training online really helped it flourish and grow. And now it's turned into over $1 million nonprofit. It's the little nonprofit nobody knows is based in Milwaukee, a global nonprofit, and over 1,000 certified facilitators in over 25 countries. It's just thrilling. And we're working at multiple scales, that family scale, because family members, family caregivers, informal caregivers, because it's not always family, really are hungry for something positive to do together, and people just don't know what to do. So there's training and tools for that. Volunteers, which includes service learning at university, so we have a creative campus program, and organizations, so social and healthcare, residential care or home-based care. all the way to the system level, like partnerships that we have with National Meals on Wheels to train all their volunteers, their drivers, and all of those, which also emerged out of a pilot project in Milwaukee.
So this has really taken off. This is really something that has, we overuse this concept, but it's scaled. It's really
It's got a ways to go.
It's got a ways to go. We don't see this widely enough, and there's people who have asked you and me, why aren't more nursing care, why aren't more assisted living environments, why aren't more people using this and doing it? And I think that's an important question. But when I'm on the way to that, I'm curious what your research and what other research shows about the impact. What are the types of things that we see at the individual level? What happens when people engage in imaginative play, when they're asked to write? What is this? If this tree could talk? What is it? What would it say if your right foot could tell a story? What happens in terms of some of the outcomes that you see and what we know from the research that's done in your work?
It's a improvement in the quality of life. You can see affect change. In other words, you can feel and see joy, meaningfulness. If one has a sense of purpose and joy and meaning, there's not agitation or anxiety, so there's a drop in that, depression, things like that, increases in communication. The thing that's great about this, and because it's a relational approach, so it happens between people, is like, I say it's like if I gave you a pill and it made everyone better all around you.
Wow.
Because it's a 360-degree impact.
Yeah.
It's working on the toxicity of the environment, which isn't just bad for the person who might have dementia or even just an isolated older adult who's feeling isolated and alone. It improves the care. The care force, the workers who are trying to provide care, because if you empty meaning out of the elder's life, you also empty meaning out of that person's life. So it improves the relational situation.
Yeah.
And it's we were talking earlier about how now that the numbers are starting to, people are finally realizing, the baby boom started a long time ago, but we're just now starting to catch up with, we're going to need to dramatically change our systems. And so people are, like venture cap is pouring tech money in to find solutions. But human meaningfulness is really a human solution that can be helped by tech. Like we're basically a web-based nonprofit that all of our resources are web-based and telephone. We have telestories and web-based interventions. But it's essentially human contact that improves the situation. So I think there's a long way to go to get it scaled. But we are on the precipice, which is really exciting.
So I think for our audience, there's going to be some interest, and we'll get to some questions in a little while about, do you have to be in a nursing home to take advantage? Do you have to be in assisted living? No, there's some things in terms of some of the self-care and some of the kits. We'll talk about that in a moment. I want to just come back, though. When I think about impact, I don't know if you know that I know the story about a family that said to me that by virtue of their engagement with your work, they thought when their mother had gone into a nursing home and she had become despondent, she was depressed, to the point of catatonic, she was lost to them. Their words. We thought our mom was lost to us, and she began engaging with your practices and what you shared. And when you talk about joy, this family had their mom back, and they used those phrases that we thought we'd lost mom, she's back. And it's like it brought her back to life in a way that, again, it's that reversal that is not the norm. And I think that's the magic, that's the power. And Anne, you're just, the world is so much better off because of what you've created. And I love the concept creative care. I love what you're doing. You define very carefully in the book creativity, care, bringing them together. And I want to, if I can, this is a bit of a sidebar, but I think it's really important to recognize that you, as the leader, you talked about your genesis with the Center for 21st Studies. Today you're the director, but the role of arts and humanity in society writ large is critically important. Can you talk just for a little bit about what is, we call it C21, Center for 21st Century Studies. What happens there? What's the purpose, and what do you do in C21?
C21, the catchphrase that I've really held on to as I've come in, I've been directing for a year now, is that we are building a community of scholars. I'm all about community building, to address the pressing issues of our time. And that arts and humanities, you can tell from my life's work that it is no question to me that they are at the core of the pressing issues of our time. We can't do it without them. And so it is humanities centered, but interdisciplinary in action. We have fellows who are graduate students, undergrads, faculty members, even system. I started out my tenure there with sending out a survey. What are the pressing issues of our time? What's at top of heart and mind for you? What research do you wish you could be doing? I love data of longing, I call it.
Yeah.
And from that, I did a themed analysis and identified themes, and we picked 3 themes: well, duty, and trust, to guide our work for the next couple of years.
Wealth, duty, and trust. Okay.
Duty, and
duty
trust.
And trust. Okay.
Yeah. So we focused in the first year. The center has traditionally done a conference that turned into a book. And the first wise thing I did was do a team leadership approach and pulled in Jennifer Johung, who's a art history professor, to help me, and then Nicole Welk-Jaeger, who's our deputy director. And so the 3 of us really are wrestling with what is a book, what is a conference, how do we engage a much broader alliance in the humanities? So right now we're really trying to build that heartbeat of the humanities and the arts and the coalition of it on campus and also regionally.
Okay.
My teaching is around, that I also link to the center, is something I call the Story Experience Fellow Program, where we're training students in a lot of these facilitation techniques around storying and meaning making to partner for a full year with a community organization to help foster that community building and growth through storying approaches. And it's an incredible way to bring what we're doing out to the larger community. And
for our students to learn and to see the value of immersion, and that change doesn't happen overnight. It's a process. And I think that's what we can model so well as an education and research institution, that these challenging issues of our time, the most vexing, wicked problems as we describe them, need that intentionality, need that deliberate focus with the experts and the knowledge that we create, but it's really those probing questions, and it really does dovetail and builds so much on what you've done. So I'm really glad you're in that leadership role and bringing those ideas to life and helping build community on and off campus. So let's come back to the book here, Creative Care. So this was sent to all of you in terms of folks who've registered for tonight's program. But I understand that beyond this book, and this is where we turn the corner now to applications, there is a kit, and it's a Creative Care Imagination Kit. And can you tell us about the kit, how it extends the work that you've done in time slips? And I think we actually happen to have a kit.
I brought you one.
Right here. So here it is, the Creative Care Imagination Kit.
Well, first of all, the book came out because I had an opportunity to kind of tell the story in the most accessible way. I am an academic, and thus far, several of my books they're very accessible, like Forget Memory, Creating Better Lives for People with Dementia, and then Creative Care. They're accessible, but I really at the end of the day, even people who believe in the work already, you know, the 1,000 certified facilitators that we already have, or the 200 organizations that are certified as creative communities of care, they get it. They believe in it, they understand it, and they say, I'm exhausted. I can't be creative today.
Yeah.
Can you just put it in a box for me so that I can just pull it out? And here's a beautiful question. I don't have to think of one.
Yeah.
Here's an image I can use as a prompt. Here's a journal with some inspirational quotes to help me when I'm like completely at my wit's end, because you can get at wit's end pretty, it's not uncommon.
It's intensive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's really that. It's putting it in a box for people to make it easy. With a, we had a grant from the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Foundation to work with families with dementia to actually do human-centered design process. So that's where that came from. And I also, something I really believe in is that there's not a lot of beauty. People don't get a chance to experience beauty in the same way in who are in intense care situations. So I wanted everything about this kit to be beautiful. The way it feels, the way it's designed, all of that, in a way to honor that experience.
So just by way of explanation, if you know the book, and most of you probably haven't had time to read the book a lot yet, Dr. Basting has used this phrase, beautiful questions, and this toolkit, workbook and things, there's an instruction and journal manual, and then there's a number of questions, and I'd ask you, if you could just bring this to life, what is a question, if I gave you this and you looked at the questions, bring one to life and talk about what happens as a process with somebody being asked that question. How does this work, and what does it instill, inspire? Just bring that magic to life a little bit. I can see this, I've read the book, and have some ideas about it, but help clarify for the audience how this might work.
So this is one of my favorites because it came right out of the Peter Pan project. And it's, if you had the ability to fly, right now, where would you go? Just lift yourself up and go.
Yeah.
And on the back are thoughtful actions that guide you through using the question a little bit more deeply or expanding on it.
Yeah.
We worked with a choreographer who just guided us through the flying.
Yeah.
What does it feel like in your shoulders?
Yeah.
You know, what do you see?
Yeah.
Who would you bring along with you? And the responses are always just incredibly powerful. It's putting a little bit of wonderment back into everyday moments.
And we had that, I think, society, it's drilled out of us. Play, imagination, wonderment, all of that you come to 3 and 4 and 5-year-old school practices. That's what kids have. And so we're trying to bring that back into life, into opportunities to escape the tedium, the boredom. And so I see how it works, and it just, again, it keeps coming back to the anecdotes, the people with whom, I've heard about and seen. You have videos, and it's seeing this happen is some of the most powerful, exciting work that you'll ever see in terms of the life-changing experience that folks have. So wonderful, and thanks for bringing that to life, indulging me a little bit on that. And I can't wait to dig into this a little bit myself. I have all sorts of fantasies right now about where I would fly, and how cool the lake might look, and other activities on such a beautiful day as what we're having in Milwaukee. So this is a special part of our program now. I get to turn to some of the questions that our audience has given us in advance. So this is from you to Dr. Basting. So first question from our audience is, how do you think society's attitudes toward the elderly have evolved over the past 50 years?
It's really complicated by the pandemic. I think at root, and I have done a lot of reading on the history of this, the United States conceptualizes itself as a young nation. It is a young nation, as a rebellious young nation. That's our history. And our economic structure is such that we value fast, short, quarterly reports.
Yeah.
We don't think long term, we think short term. We think productivity. And so almost everything I just said is not aging, right?
Yeah, right.
And the marketplace sells us that. It sells us youth. It sells us what's disappearing every second I'm talking, right? It sells us what we are going to lose, because that's what we can't get back is what has value. So we don't value long-term thinking. We don't value life cycle thinking, or in the indigenous conceptualization, multi-generational perspective thinking. We definitely don't value waiting or reflection or any of those things that are about the accumulation of time and experience, and about the gradual decrease in physical capacity in relationship to a younger body.
Yeah.
Any of those things, all of those things are devalued structurally in the way we make up our economy and our historical perception of the United States as a country. And we tend to lack the ability to think of progress and loss simultaneously. We identify one or the other. Those nice, you're in business, that, right? We don't value them. We can't see them happening simultaneously. So in a situation where someone is experiencing accumulation of losses, it is hard for us to conceptualize that there is also gains. So it is complex thinking that we need to use to value aging. So we're already swimming upstream there.
Yeah.
I think that hasn't gotten easier in 50 years.
Right.
I think that there still is, we see a lot more media representation. I've written a lot about media representation of older people, and even now people with dementia, there's a lot. My gosh, I can't even keep up. People are always sending me media representations of dementia, and that's great. But the cultural status and the overarching treatment and the willingness to invest, I don't think has changed.
That's really interesting. And let me springboard from this and ask you, do you see the same thing in other societies and other cultures and things from which we can learn? Are there other countries that approach this, other societies that approach this differently?
I think there's in countries that have a longer history and have a greater capacity to think in complex ways about time and human life courses in the context of longer time frames. That's a complicated way to say yes. And where there are embedded cultural traditions for valuing life experience, and for older people to have different purpose, oftentimes childcare in multi-generational families. But I will say we're also fighting that, like China is rapidly adopting, sadly, the United States model of long-term care and nursing homes popping up because the population aging there and the crisis they have because of the lack of young people as their population is aging. And you look at Japan. Jason Danley was a postdoc fellow here when I was at the Center on Aging Community and does beautiful writing about aging in Japan, which is just a real lesson because of the super aging and the super dying of the country now. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, I wondered if you would talk about Asian cultures, because that's, I think, oftentimes what I think of when we look at long time horizons and aspects. related to some Asian and Eastern philosophies, I know that mindfulness is very important to your work, and my in-laws, Jane and Dan, who are on the call with us tonight, are very much into this, and Susan Lubar is a great proponent, and I know you know Susan and work with her. But this is that engagement, this is that reflective thinking, isn't it? And mindfulness has a lot to do with your work.
I think creating spaces for thought and reflection and valuing that is really powerful. It's a part of opening up space for imagination and calming the mind.
Yeah.
I think that to me, the real value of mindfulness is not to let the hurried pace of that culture I was talking about before, that super, super fast pace, derail you. Or create a layer of anxiety that makes you feel less than, and enables you, I think, to foment a sense and build a sense of resilience and capacity.
Yeah. Get better defenses. You're thought through and have the opportunity to reflect and consider things. Really valuable tools. So the next question from our audience is, what do you think is the future of continuing care retirement communities? So the previous question was, how has society evolved, attitudes toward aging? Now it's almost prospectively, what do you see in terms of the future of continuing care retirement communities?
Well, I'm going to be biased and say that, I said that thing about we have this odd separation of arts and culture and health and social services, and that you can see manifest in continuing care retirement communities. I think they can't anymore. They need to be vibrant cultural centers, and that was one thing I ended up saying about the Kentucky project, is that we were making this stigmatized health center into a cultural center where the whole community came to it as a resource for really interesting things happening, so that there's a sense of flow. Like you don't only enter the continuing care retirement community out of pity as a volunteer. You enter because it is a place where really interesting things are going to happen. It is part of the world. It's not separated from the world. A dream would be if the Milwaukee Art Museum had, and actually St. John's has the Museum of Wisconsin Art as a branch inside of it, that there were symbiotic relationships between arts and culture institutions and these places. They're just additional places of living where people happen to be getting health support. I think we can't have that sense of separation anymore. It doesn't make any sense. Also, I think that the staffing needs to also feel that sense of support. And one of the things I think is a really challenging and interesting question is, what if staff got health care there too? What if they were supported in childcare on site, so that their capacity to care is boosted, rather than solely focusing on the residents, that it's a relational quality of life.
So when you talk about the pill, that if you could take a pill that would change those in your environment around you, this is actually something larger. The scale is much greater because of what you're talking about in terms of systems, organization, that the entire facility and community, more broadly, is actually part of this ecosystem, if you will, of care, of relationship building. And to go back to the question, if we think about the future of care and aging, what you've got in Kentucky as a model, what would have to happen for other states and other regions to embrace this more? What are some of the levers, points of influence? Is it word of mouth? Is it certain advocates within healthcare that stand up. I'm thinking about that in terms of agency and how do we foment this more positive change in an environment that oftentimes is about efficiency. It's about institutionalized care that is not as caring as unfortunately your world has created in other circumstances. So I wonder what the factors are that will help bring those communities that you talked about, arts, culture, humanities, with some of the institutionalized care models that, because of funding and because of the way efficiencies and bureaucracies can work, don't always work to bring them together.
I think I think the health insurers, Medicare Advantage, and Medicaid, and are going to see the preventative advantage to this. And now I'm just totally going out into fantasy land. If you're willing to go with me, an artist or culture maker, so that's like arts and humanities, learning culture makers through expression and learning, at every public health center, library, every care community, and that it used to be called activity directors, but if their work was actually reimbursable, because right now it's just seen as kind of an extra thing that we do at the care community, and it means that work is ghettoized and not taken seriously when it really needs to be. The whole field of activity directors and life enrichment coordinators needs to be transformed. The vast majority of older people are living at home, and they will live at home almost all the way through.
Right.
And the transitional capacity needs support. And what I mean by that is, like, what if libraries, arts and culture organizations hosted meaning-making programming for older people? A lot of them in Milwaukee are, thanks to the Bader Philanthropies.
Yes.
A lot of their really groundbreaking work supports that. But it needs to even go deeper.
Yeah.
And even in long-term care communities, that they could open their meaning-making programming to people living in the community, and home care, almost like a homeschool relationship with a school, right? You know, they can participate in some of the programming. It's that kind of a systems opening up. I see it almost like in irrigation, when you open up an irrigation ditch and water metaphors galore, but that you open up those channels for people to take advantage of those programs.
Really instructive, really helpful. I'm glad you mentioned the Bader Philanthropies, because I was going to refer actually not only to them, but also the Helen Bader School of Social Welfare. And I think about points of influence. We have also our Zilber School of Public Health, College of Nursing, College of Health Sciences. And I think that collaboration with them in terms of our engagement with the community and your work presents a very fruitful avenue for continued modeling and scaling, and thinking about how Milwaukee can continue to be really a great model, a great place for this work to be showcased, and for your work to really demonstrate impact that we continue to build on. And you're doing that in such scale already. It's wonderful to have the organizations, the trained facilitators, your model. Timeslips.org, is that okay? Yes. Timeslips.org. Learn more about it there, and of course resources that are in the book. Okay, let's go on with the next question. I don't know if we're going to be able to get through all of these. There's great questions and wonderful discussion. So what are the symptoms and potential treatments of dementia? And a related question, more fundamentally, what is dementia in terms of, and then symptoms and potential treatments of dementia? For dementia.
Here's where I make the note that the Dr. Basting is not an MD. It definitely is a PhD in theater arts. But I have done a lot of reading, and I would say in general, dementia is the umbrella category for cognitive changes that affect your daily life. Commonly memory, also executive functions, decision-making capacity. There's a lot of different kinds of dementia, Alzheimer's is often identified as the most common, around 60%. And Alzheimer's itself has some different things inside of it. Early onset we talked about before, which is really a very different strand of it rather than late onset, anything over 65. So those are the symptoms. It is progressive, gets worse. The forgetting can be seen on a bodily level, where the body will forget how to do things.
Wow. So it's not just cognitive, but it's actually like some of
Physical.
the motor functions and things.
Yeah, yeah. Swallowing is one of the last ones. It's very difficult. It can be it can be like up to 15 years of living with it. There's other kinds, vascular, which is often related to mini strokes or heart disease. The best treatment right now, in my mind, is really prevention. That is one of the reasons I think the researchers have really been pushing toward biomarkers, being able to tell when this is happening, so that we know. The hope is that if you can prevent it, push the symptoms down farthest, that you'll actually end up passing away from something else before the disease manifests itself.
Okay.
What's good for the heart is good for the brain.
Yeah.
It's all about oxygen, brain circulation, blood circulation. So exercise, eating right, social connections, meaning making, purpose, all of those things are the things that are holistically healthy.
So there are probably medicines also, once one has this, and that's not the world that we're in and talking about here tonight, but the behavioral interventions, the types of engagements that we've been talking about, once one does have dementia, those, it seems like, to your point, prevention is the best, from a defense, but once it occurs, then my understanding and what I seem to see so compellingly is from an arrest of this, or a recovery, if you will, the coming back from further decline does really seem to work through a lot of the exercises, activities, engagement, play, imagination that you've brought to life. Is that really one of the big takeaways here?
I think that a lot of people's experience of this is around fear and grieving while the family is going through this. And that locks people down. It blocks the potential to live fully the life that you have in the remaining time that you're experiencing the dementia as a family. And if the grieving is real, of what we had hoped the last days of our lives would end up like, is different than what we thought. The person is changing, and so change is loss, change is grief. You have to grieve that. But it can't block your access to embracing the person as they are now, or that person is completely lost to you in the way that you described.
Yeah.
And so these are the techniques that open up those moments to find each other through play and meaning making, that give you back the last days together.
Yeah.
It also, one of the most powerful things that happened in one of the sessions of making the kit was that we just put the cards out on the table. We didn't even have any instructions. And the families came and just started playing, and the room filled with laughter. And then we came to a focus group afterwards. We're like, come on back, we have to talk. And they, one of the gentlemen who was caring for his wife, who had initially said, she can't do this, that she'll never be able to do this. He was welling up and he said, we used to play games with our grandkids and they don't know how to play with us anymore. We can do this with them. And It was like, the family can all find each other again across generations. The loss is not going to go away. So it gives you the strength to move into it and to be together in that moment.
there's a phrase that a family is only as healthy as the unhealthiest member. Family is only as happy as the unhappiest member. And to bring a person back, to really bring them back into the family, can really, there's a lot of different issues that families can have, but this is one that's so tangible and so important as we think about, as you described with your mom, and you describe other people, their parents or their wives, their spouses and loved ones. This is just so powerful. It's also so relevant because of, as you described earlier, the baby boomers and the aging, and there's more of us all the time that are in these situations. Last question before I wrap up. Actually, there's two more. One, I'm going to broaden it back out, but just one, the last one from the audience. How might anti-anxiety medications given to the elderly help with overall health and well-being?
I've been reading actually a lot about the surge in mental health issues and anxiety among young people.
Yes, right.
And really the incredible increase in anti-anxiety medications for young people, which are life-saving in some situations, and I am sure that they are life-saving as well for older people. I can't speak to the medical component
Right.
of it, but I would say that one of the things I heard in a report about young people dealing with mental health issues and anxiety is that it's a collision of our culture being so fast and having so many expectations on these young people that they're not ready for. And so it's actually a collision between how we've created the culture we live in and our own psychosocial needs at this moment.
Yeah.
And if you transport that model to older people, it's a similar thing. The expectations or the context in which we find ourselves as older people is not meeting the psychosocial needs that we have.
Yeah.
And so I think while those medications, certainly, I don't have a doubt, definitely talk to your doctor, not me, but that they would have some soothing qualities.
Yeah.
I think we really need to invest in the larger question around why are our environments of care so toxic?
Yeah.
Why
Right.
is the larger
Right.
culture toxic to aging and disability? And work on that front.
Yeah. Well, let me wrap the questions up with one that I'm going to combine two facets. One part is, what's your focus this semester as we come back and we've been through the pandemic and now the world is, so I'm curious about what's your focus, and then what's the future for Dr. Basting? What's the big next thing?
Look in the crystal ball.
Yeah.
Well, I've got, of course, you can imagine I have a list the length of my arm of what I'm
Yeah.
working on this semester. So one, I'm just finding tremendous joy at the Center for 21st Century
Yeah.
Studies, turning this incredible resource that we have on campus
Yeah.
of all of these incredible scholars toward the public, like
Yeah.
really doing, building on our access mission
Yeah.
at the university to making all of this rich work in the arts and humanities accessible.
Yeah.
And also, I think, building collaboration inside of it. Lonely No More was our conference theme for last year. The center has created an exhibit. It's a long story. You can read about it on the center's website. So that's opening on the 22nd. We have an open house this Friday. Exciting things for our conference this spring, which is called Nourishing Trust, around issues of food and land justice. And also looking toward next year, which is called Trust the Vote.
Wow. Big
Issues
deal.
of trust and civic engagement.
Wow.
So we are doing some really exciting, collaborative, publicly accessible,
Yeah.
rigorous work there, and I find it really rewarding. Continuing to just push for pouring the resources of time slips into the water to scale it as much as possible, bringing new people on board, and I'm caring with and for my mom, and also writing essays about that may or may not go into a new book. I do not know. Working on, just today before I came here, I was reading a Jack Zipes book on the history of fairy tales. In order to do, developing a project called Stories We Know by Heart, which of course builds on my work with the Odyssey and Peter Pan, and identifying stories to use in subsequent large-scale arts and culture projects, in really intergenerational. And then I'm teaching the Story Experience program, which is just amazing. The students are just getting launched. They're collaborating with The Gathering, Milwaukee Turners, Islands of Brilliance, some of the aging care, Ovation, East Castle Place. There's just a whole range of places that the students are in relationship with for the year. So that's this semester. I know, it's a lot.
That is huge. And then by virtue of that answer, you talked about a number of things that have filled your queue for easily the next few years, and how exciting, how impactful. This has been just a wonderful conversation, and I want to thank you for taking the time out of all your other things that you've just described and sharing with our audience and with me the story of how you've developed this, the impact that it's had, how it scales, how it's so important. And your work is so emblematic of what we try to do. It's prototypical of the best things that a research university with an access and an engagement mission can do. Our audience may know that we're among the top research universities in the country. 146 universities out of 4,600 have our designation as a Carnegie Research University, but we're also one of 350 campuses that is known as a Carnegie Engaged University. Your work with C21, Center for 21st Century Studies, really is that type of engagement, and it really expands upon the work that you're doing as a scholar, teacher, and professor, to really enable others to have similar windows, but also collaboratively. So this is pretty powerful, and thank you for what you do. Thank you for sharing your time with us tonight. I also want to thank our virtual audience for joining me with Dr. Basting tonight, and I hope that you found this to be as enriching, provocative, mindful, and helpful, quite fascinating and interesting. Any more adjectives? We can keep going, but it's really, as you can tell, exciting for me to be able to have this opportunity to kick our series off with you and this year. Do stay tuned. We're going to be back on October 12th. We're going to have wonderful engagement with our athletic director, Amanda Braun, and our new coach, who will be introducing new basketball coach, men's basketball, Bart Lundy. And so stay tuned for that in terms of many of the activities that are in play, so to speak. So thank you for joining us from far and locally, and we'll see you again very soon. Anne, thanks again.
My pleasure.
Great.